This is why I love art, painting art. It's the one of the few mediums and few beautiful things in life that is still untouched. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Making the Cut. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that is very, very dear to my heart, very important, and it was the beginning of when I started making different moves in my career. So, this episode is called Exposing the Consumer. So, as I've said, I used to, back when I opened my studio, it quickly turned into a factory. I really like, if I'm making one of something, I like making 1,000 of it, or 2,000, or 5,000. So, my background is manufacturing, domestic manufacturing, and product development. I came up with the idea to make a documentary back in 2000 called Exposing the Consumer. Why? Back in 2000, something happened, geopolitics, where the World Trade Organization removed quotas. It sort of happened in 1999. Between 1999 and 2002, there was different quotas that were removed. This is major and the beginning of what they call, or it's not the beginning, but a very large chunk of the New World Order. Why this matters? It changes economics. So it matters to all of us. I want to discuss this because for me, being in apparel, being in manufacturing, and me owning a factory, I was able to see what was happening in real time and how it affected me. I started my factory in 89, 90. So by 1995, I had over 2.5 million in gross sales, and I had clients in the US and Canada that would manufacture with us. All of my manufacturing was domestic, okay? Which meant my 50 sewers were making a livable wage in Vancouver, Canada, all right? They were new to the country because sewers generally are Vietnamese or Chinese, or Asians are amazing at manufacturing. And they were new. So at that time, Canada had a really good immigration of Vietnamese and Chinese. Anyway, what I started noticing on television was there was a lot of exposés on sweatshops. So 48 Hours, 2020, I think even 60 Minutes, Nightline, they were all doing these reports. Kathy Lee Griffin's designs found in a Lower East Side New York sweatshop, or Nike found using sweatshops in such and such and such in North America. Now, back then, I'd owned a factory, I'd run factories, my factory, for 8 years. I had never walked into a sweatshop. Now it's 35 years I'm in the industry, and I've never walked into a sweatshop in North America or otherwise. But I've walked into some places that, would I want to go to every day? Maybe not. But no, I've never seen anybody, chained or suffering. So I found these fascinating, these exposés. And they really went hard after Phil Knight and Nike. I mean, he was the leader in all these exposés. Nike, sweatshop, overseas, unfair wages. Well, I think they were fair wages for whatever was happening overseas, I think. However, the interesting thing is regarding Nike and the unfair wages. When I had my factory, there was something called being a Nike approved factory. So what these exposés, or people don't talk about, is that Nike in fact put in place before any other company a checklist that all overseas factories had to check to be a Nike approved factory, meaning fair wages, fair work environment, fair, all these things. Then all the other companies, if they were manufacturing domestically or overseas, would first ask you, are you a Nike approved factory? You'd get a stamp, actually, even if you weren't producing for Nike. Nobody knows about this very much, and I feel that they should, because I do believe that the narrative, the media, and governments were in bed together on this to actually make manufacturing seem like it was exploitation. So I go back to quotas. What are quotas? Back before 99, every country implemented the quota system. What this meant is each country could only import X amount of units of whatever, clothing, cotton, polyester, wool, cars, lumber, eyeglass, plastics, you name it. There was a quota for every alarm clocks. When I was growing up, I remember having an alarm clock that read made in the USA. So every single thing you could possibly purchase, including food, fell under the quota system for every country in the world. This is why before 2000, people could live a very comfortable life with two incomes making minimum wage. You could buy a home, you could go on vacation, you could live life. What happened when quotas ended? What this means is there was absolutely zero monitoring, policing, protecting. That's what they call quotas, is protectionism. That's the wording they use. Of product coming into your country, wherever that country is. Now, how does that work? Well, in North America, we now don't have to pay minimum wage, affordable minimum wage, to manufacturers of cars, of clothing, farming, what else? Anything. Nail manufacturers. Nail, I don't mean nails, I mean hammering anything that needs to get made. There is absolutely no limit of how much of that you can import. How does this impact you, me, everybody? The reason fast fashion exists is because quotas no longer do. Now, I'm going to use the example of my industry because I know it inside out, but you can apply it to any industry. After they took away quotas, textiles has become the second largest pollutant in the world after oil, to give you an idea of how serious the impact of no quotas is. Because what the world has done is created North America, first world continent, to be the ultimate consumer of everything. Now, clothing falls into one of the largest things because, we all have a lot of clothes. However, so New York used to be the manufacturing hub in the US, especially for clothing. Over the last 50 years, I think it is, but massive in the last 25. The garment industry, which was literally 95% of where the American-made product was made for clothing, has shrunk to under 10%. In fact, I think it's 5%, which I feel is very, very, it's very sad because New York being the mecca of almost everything, especially fashion, it was the only hub, the garment district, where the top designers had their offices, and they worked from Carolina Herrera to, Ralph Lauren to, well, Diamond Pustenberg was in the meatpacking district and still is. But that's also Cynthia Rowley. That's where they got, so their offices were down the street from the factory that was making their garments. And Fashion Week also happened once upon a time in the garment district. And I remember when they moved Fashion Week. It's over a decade now that it's moved. But it was I was living in New York at that time. It was a sad thing for me because it was the only city in the world where the designer, the manufacturer, the fabric suppliers, and a world-renowned fashion week would happen, all within the same 4 blocks, 3 avenues. It's quite spectacular. Anyway, why did this happen? And what was going on with the 60 Minutes and the 2020s and the Nightlines? I feel that the media was in bed with the powers of the world, and they wanted to shove down the consumer's throat that manufacturing was sweatshop. It was child labor. It was bad because shipping all of this offshore was coming. And they wanted the consumer to be okay with made in China, made in Bangladesh, made in India, made in wherever else, but was no longer made in the USA or made in Canada. Now, I don't have proof of that. The only proof is follow the money. And when you take a look and see how much money, and we'll put it in our link, was being manufactured domestically before quotas were taken away and how much after, I kind of think that's the proof. As far as consumers go, when I used to have my factories, I mean, this is one person, but it was the general idea of it. When I would tell anybody I owned a factory, the first thing that came out of their mouth was always, oh, you run a sweatshop. Oh, you run a sweatshop. You have to understand, we're talking the late 90s, early 2000s. My factory was painted pink, purple, blue, yellow, orange, because it was the Friends days. So I painted my apartment like Monica in Friends, and I had so much extra paint. We painted the factory the same. You couldn't walk into like a kid's tutoring place that was more friendly. Like my place was so crazy friendly. Anyway, you could go to the fanciest restaurant and stick a sewing machine in the middle of it and somebody would call it a sweatshop. My friend who wanted to start an underwear line walked into my factory and said, oh, this is what a sweatshop looks like. I was so fed up with this. It was about 2003. I said, can I take a look at the back of your shirt? He was what I call an executive tree hugger. So somebody that thinks they're really environmental, somebody that speaks the whole environmental thing, somebody that always calls you out for anything that's not environmental. So I said, can I see the back of your shirt? And there it was, made in China. So it bothered me, not because the shirt was made in China, but because the consumer was missing what was happening. So what was happening? How does this affect you economically? Minimum wage has been a really big conversation in politics for the presidential runs, for our elections here, for Prime Minister in Canada, for everywhere. Minimum wage has to go up. Minimum wage, no one has brought up that minimum wage didn't go up because it didn't have to. It did not have to. Because everything that was getting made was being shipped offshore. So North America became more of a service country, which is fine. So you have your influencers, social media, marketing stuff. That's all great. However, it impacts people that go into retail sales on the floor. Minimum wage didn't go up. Waitresses, waiters, minimum wage didn't go up. Hardware store workers, Home Depot workers, all these places where new immigrants get a job, where people that are a little bit more on the fringe or can't afford to go to school or get a job. Minimum wage didn't go up. So it created well, first of all, it took out the middle class, because if you look at middle class, it's all manufacturing. There are people that go to a factory, that are butchers, that are they work with their hands proudly. And again, you could bring up a very healthy family in an upper middle class neighborhood and live a really good life once upon a time with these jobs. The reason you no longer can isn't because the job is not good. It's because of the geopolitics that have happened that have not made the salaries and the wages go up. Therefore, the minimum wage doesn't need to go up. Therefore, you keep having a larger and larger lower middle class and low class or lower class. But there is such there's such intelligence in places we otherwise wouldn't think there would be, I think is the best way that I can put it. We look at fast fashion and we think, that's crazy. Who needs this? Who needs that? There's a lot of intelligence when you take a look and say, how did this happen? How did this happen? And see how it connects to you. I don't know if maybe before this episode you ever thought that figuring out how Zara and H&M became so big had anything to do with minimum wage and what your entry-level salary might be. But they are all connected. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. This was a little bit more of a food for thought. Take a look at certain things that interest you and break it down. I also actually want to say this is why I love art, painting art. It's one of the few mediums and few beautiful things in life that is still untouched. Yes, you have art collectors. Yes, you have this that monetize it. But you don't yet have a record company that owns the artist in painting, the way you do in film, the way you do in music, the way you do in everything else. And that's why I just sort of love the crazy of art, because it's still wild. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let us know if this episode made the cut.